Now, Mr. President, I'm also here today to make a UC request for the Senate to consider my legislation, the Banning Unlawful Machine Gun Parts, or BUMP Act. Nearly 7 years ago, on October the 1st of 2017, more than 20,000 people gathered for a large outdoor music festival. It was the third day in a row that folks from all around the country joined their friends and family to hear music from some of their favorite musicians. And no one could have anticipated the nightmare that was about to unfold that day. Just after 10 o'clock at night, thousands were listening to the final performance of the night. And then over the music, they started to hear what at first people thought were fireworks. Rapid gunfire rained down on the crowd with shots so close together that they seemed to almost bleed into each other. Complete panic erupted. And for the next terrifying 10 minutes, concert goers ran in every direction, searching for cover where there was none. Some falling down next to bleeding friends and dying loved ones. Others fleeing desperately, trying to reach safety. In total, the shooter fired more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition in just 10 minutes. He killed 58 people that night, injured hundreds more, including 2 more who had ultimately perished from their wounds. It was and is the deadliest mass shooting in American history. The Las Vegas gunman was able to murder and injure so many people so quickly because he used a deadly device known as a bump stock. Bump stocks are an attachment that modifies semi-automatic firearms to dramatically increase their rate of fire, allowing them to operate as fully automatic weapons. They make it possible to shoot hundreds of rounds a minute. And let me be real clear, as a firearms owner myself, there's no legitimate use for a bump stock. Not for self-defense, not in a law enforcement context, not even in military applications, as they're less accurate than a standard fully automatic military platform. But what they are tailor-made for is a mass shooting. Now, I know there are people who will say guns don't kill people, people kill people. But the reality is this: bump stocks kill and injure in the hundreds. As someone who has owned and used firearms for most of my life, for hunting, for sport, for self-defense, I know for a fact that bump stocks serve no legitimate purpose. And that's why in the days and weeks that followed the horrific mass shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada, I led a bipartisan effort to ban bump stocks. I introduced legislation in the Senate alongside my Republican colleague and friend Jeff Flake of Arizona and Nevada's Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. We also called on then-President Trump to use his authority to ban bump stocks in a federal rule. Now, President Trump actually agreed with us at the time and finalized an ATF rule to get that done. But last week, our wildly out-of-touch Supreme Court majority invalidated that rule. In an illogical and deadly ruling, they made bump stocks legal once again. Now, as Justice Sotomayor said in her dissent, when I see a bird that walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, I call that bird a duck. I agree with Justice Sotomayor. A bump stock equipped semi-automatic rifle is a machine gun. And it should be banned just like machine guns have been banned for nearly 100 years. Now, even still, within the Supreme Court's majority's ruling, they gave Congress, they gave us clear direction on the only way for us to protect Americans from these deadly devices. Congress needs to act. We need to pass my bill to ban bump stocks and do it now. And I am proud to lead the Banning Unlawful Machine Gun Parts, or BUMP Act, alongside senators like Catherine Cortez Masto, Susan Collins, Angus King, and the more than 20 new co-sponsors who joined our legislation after the Supreme Court's recent ruling. This is the same bipartisan bill that I first introduced in 2018 in the aftermath of that shooting. The Bump Act would prohibit the sale of bump stocks and other devices that allow semi-automatic firearms to increase their rate of fire and operate as fully automatic weapons. This is something that nearly all Americans agree should be done. This should be a common sense, bipartisan, public safety vote that all of us should welcome if we believe that our kids should have the freedom to feel safe in their church or their classroom or their movie theater. We should also be clear about what happens if we don't pass this legislation. We will be giving a free pass to street gangs and cartels and mass shooters to access these deadly devices and turn them against our communities. That's the harm that we're putting our communities in. There's some skepticism out there about whether Congress can get this done, about whether all of us coming together to ban bump stocks is impossible. But 2 years ago, we proved that type of thinking is flat wrong. Over my time here in the Senate, I have learned that people are always quick to tell you there's no path forward for your legislation. And the reality is that there is never a path forward until we collectively choose to make one. I was proud to be part of the core group of bipartisan negotiators here in the Senate that helped pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was the first significant federal gun safety legislation signed into law in nearly 3 decades. And during those negotiations, I worked especially close with my colleague, Senator Collins, on a successful effort to increase criminal penalties for those who would put guns into the hands of criminals and to make it illegal to traffic firearms out of our country. And by passing that law, we proved that Congress can take concrete action to protect our communities from gun violence. Now, Mr. President, now it's time that we take similar bipartisan action to ban these bump stocks. And for my part, I refuse to stand idly by and wait for the next mass shooting. So I would ask all of my colleagues to please support the Bump Act, to ban these deadly mass killing devices once and for all. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of S-1909, the Banning Unlawful Machine Gun Parts Act, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Nebraska.
Welcome to another day in the Democrats' summer of show votes. We need to be very clear why the majority leader is now holding this show vote. The Supreme Court made a decision last week that he didn't like. A 6-3 majority of the Supreme Court ruled the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives overstepped their authority when they tried to reclassify bump stocks as machine guns. The Supreme Court made the right decision. In January, I joined Senator Lummis and other colleagues in filing an amicus brief urging the Supreme Court to do what they did. But the majority leader and his Democrat colleagues supported the gun-grabbing overreach. So the majority leader has decided to bring up a bill called the Bump Act. He claims this bill will ban bump stocks. But just like his previously misnamed bills, if you actually read the bill, that's not what it does at all. The Bump Act targets common firearm accessories, not just bump stocks. This is from the text of the bill. The bill bans any manual, power-driven, or electronic device primarily designed or redesigned so that when the device is attached to a semi-automatic firearm, the device materially increases the rate of fire of the firearm. In short, this doesn't ban bump stocks. This bill would ban literally any item that makes a firearm easier and in some cases safer to shoot. We're talking about competition or adjustable triggers. We're also talking about items that reduce the distance between a shooter's hand and the trigger, like certain firearm stocks or grips. Again, it's not just about bump stocks. That's why disabled veterans hate this bill. I've heard about veterans in Nebraska who are concerned about this bill. Sometimes veterans who are disabled or elderly choose to adjust the stock or grip on a firearm to make it easier and safer to shoot. The Constitution protects their right to do so, that through the Second Amendment. This bill would take that constitutional right away from the same men and women who fought for our Constitution. The other problem with this bill is that it doesn't even define what it's trying to regulate. The bill uses the phrase rate of fire 5 separate times. 3 of those times, the bill said it would ban a device that materially increases the rate of fire of a firearm. Nowhere in the bill does it define what constitutes the rate of fire increase. The other 2 times, it says it would ban a device that approximates the action or rate of fire of a machine gun. But under federal law, it's not the rate of fire that makes something a machine gun. Under 26 U.S.C. 5845B, it's a mechanical function. So either this rate of fire section was written by someone who had no idea what they were talking about, or it's a cynical attempt to include more firearm accessories than just bump stocks. I would bet the latter. And let's be honest, does anyone seriously believe this lawless Biden administration would interpret this law in a way that respects law-abiding gun owners? Not. On this and other issues, the Biden administration has repeatedly expanded previously interpretations of our laws in ways that go far beyond what even the Obama administration was comfortable with. And they were no friends of the Second Amendment. We cannot allow unelected bureaucrats at the ATF to abuse their authority and interpret laws in ways Congress clearly never intended. So this bill may be called the Bump Act, but it's not really about bump stocks. This bill is about banning as many firearm accessories as possible and giving ATF broad authority to ban most semi-automatic firearms. It's an unconstitutional attack on law-abiding gun owners. Under this bill, owners of any semi-automatic firearm that has been modified to make it easier to fire would be forced to register their firearms alongside actual machine guns in the ATF's National Firearm Registration and Transfer Record database. And if they don't, they'd be in violation of the law. That's really, really scary. If this bill becomes law, it would give the Biden administration the authority to force confiscation of any common semi-automatic firearm that has been modified to make it easier to shoot. The majority leader knows this bill will not pass. It won't pass because enough people in this building still believe in the Constitution. And the Constitution affords Americans the right to own a firearm. This vague, overreaching bill directly infringes upon that right. For safety, we ought to better enforce existing gun laws and address mental health issues. This bill doesn't do that. In fact, it doesn't do anything to address the root causes of gun violence. We're not addressing the mental health or cultural issues driving men and women to commit these horrible crimes, the failed family structures, the oppression, the division and glorification of violence on social media. If Democrats really cared about gun violence, they'd be trying to build support for a bill that can actually pass. Instead, we have a show vote on a bill that uses vague language to ban as many firearms accessories as possible and limit the Second Amendment rights of disabled and elderly Americans who may need certain accessories to use a firearm safely. We should be working on things that actually keep Americans safe, like the National Defense Authorization Act. For these reasons, Mr. President, therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from New Mexico.
I just want to remind our colleagues that we actually did pass legislation 2 years ago to invest in mental health. And we passed a meaningful gun safety piece of legislation. But the assertion that this would ban some enormous number of firearm devices is certainly not rooted in fact. It would, however, ban bump stocks, and it would ban things like Glock switches, which also let semi-automatic firearms act as fully automatic firearms. Mr. President, I think the American people understand what common sense gun safety looks like, and that's what the Bump Act is all about. I will reserve the rest of my time, but this will not be the last time you hear about these devices on the floor of the Senate.